Her stepfather shaved her head so no man would want her, but the most wanted duke chose her anyway. The cold bit deeper than the shame, but only just. Eleanor's fingers trembled as they rose to her scalp, bare now, ravaged now, and traced the line of a razor cut still weeping blood into the rain. The mud beneath her knees was freezing, but she could not feel her legs anymore. She could not feel much of anything except the burn where her hair had been. No man will want you now. Her stepfather's words hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. He had spoken them slowly, precisely, as though he were delivering a sermon, as though he were teaching her something holy. His hand had been steady on the razor. His face had shown nothing, not anger, not satisfaction, not even disgust. Just the cold practicality of a man solving a problem. And she had been the problem. The rain came harder now, drumming against the stones of the lane, against the ruins of the dress she still wore. It had been her mother's once, green silk with embroidered primroses along the hem. She had worn it to the market that morning, hopeful and foolish, because a young man had smiled at her the week before, because she had thought, for one small moment, that her life might be something other than what it was. Her stepfather had seen the smile, had seen the young man's interest, had seen the future she imagined, and crushed it with the efficiency of a man snuffing a candle. You will not leave this house as anything but what you are, a burden and a debt. The shaving had been methodical. He had not shouted. He had not struck her. He had simply taken her by the arm, sat her in the chair by the kitchen fire, and removed every trace of the girl she had been. Her hair had fallen in long dark waves to the floor, gathering in soft piles like something sacred being desecrated. She had not cried. Not then. She had bitten the inside of her cheek until she tasted copper, and she had not cried. But she cried now. Now, alone in the lane 3 miles from the house, cast out with nothing but the ruined dress and the leather boots that no longer fit because her feet had swollen from walking. Now, with her hands pressed to her shorn head and the rain washing the blood down her neck in thin, warm rivers. Now, she cried. The wind picked up, cutting through the thin fabric of her dress as though it were made of paper. She had no shawl, no cloak. He had allowed her nothing. He had opened the door, pointed to the road, and told her that God would provide for the wicked if he saw fit, and if he did not, then she would learn what happened to daughters who thought themselves better than their station. She did not think herself better. She had never thought herself better. She had only wanted to be seen. The young man's name had been Thomas. He was a clerk in his father's shop, neat and kind, with ink-stained fingers and a gentle voice. He had asked her about the weather, about the price of apples, about whether she liked to read. Small questions, harmless questions. Questions that had made her feel, for the first time in years, like a person and not a piece of furniture her stepfather kept in working order. And for that, for smiling, for answering, for daring to hope, she had been marked. She lowered her hands from her head and stared at them. They were shaking violently now, pale and blue-veined in the failing light. There were cuts on her palms from where she had gripped the chair as the razor moved. She had not screamed. She had not begged him to stop. She had given him nothing. That was all she had left now, her silence, her refusal to break. The lane stretched endlessly in both directions, dark and rutted and empty. No travelers, no carriages, no lights from distant houses. She had walked until her legs gave out, and then she had knelt here, in the mud, because standing seemed impossible and lying down seemed like surrender. She would not surrender. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled low and threatening across the hills. The storm was worsening. She needed shelter. She needed warmth. She needed mercy from a world that had shown her none. But she would not beg. Her mother had taught her that, in the last days before the fever took her. "Eleanor," she had whispered, her hand hot and dry in Eleanor's small one, "you are worth more than they will ever tell you. Do not believe their lies. Do not become small to make them comfortable." Eleanor had been 12 then. She was 22 now, 10 years of her stepfather's house. 10 years of being reminded daily that she was unwanted, unwelcome, undowried, and therefore unmarriageable. 10 years of silence and service and swallowed rage. And now this. She touched her head again, gently this time, and felt the rough stubble beneath her fingertips. It would grow back. Hair always grew back. But the shame, the deliberate, calculated shame that would take longer to shed. The rain eased slightly, softening to a mist that clung to her skin like cobwebs. She forced herself to breathe, in through her nose, out through. Her mouth, slowly, the way her mother had taught her when the fear became too much. She was still breathing. That meant she was still alive. And if she was still alive, then this was not the end. Somewhere behind her, far down the road, she thought she heard the sound of hooves. But the rain distorted everything, and hope was a dangerous thing to hold on to. She closed her eyes and waited for the cold to take her, or for the dawn to come, or for whatever came next in a world that seemed determined to break her. But she would not break. Not tonight. The hoofbeats were real. Elena heard them before she believed them, a steady rhythm cutting through the rain, growing louder with each passing second. Not the phantom sounds of exhaustion or desperation. Not her mind conjuring rescue from nothing. Real hooves, real weight striking the ground, real and coming closer. She did not move. Moving required strength she no longer possessed, and hope she could not afford. She remained where she was, kneeling in the mud, her hands pressed against her thighs to stop their shaking. If the rider passed her by, so be it. If the rider stopped, she did not know whether that would be better or worse. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. She heard the creak of leather, the jingle of a bridle, the low murmur of a man's voice speaking to his horse. Footsteps in the mud, heavy, deliberate, coming toward her. Elena forced her eyes open and looked up. The man was tall, taller than anyone she had ever seen, and dressed in a long dark coat that gleamed faintly in the rain. His face was shadowed beneath the brim of his hat, but she could see the sharp line of his jaw, the set of his shoulders, the way he stood utterly still as he stared down at her. He did not speak immediately. For a long moment, he simply looked at her shorn head, at her ruined dress, at the blood and mud that covered her, and something passed across his face that she could not name. Not pity, not disgust, something heavier, something that looked almost like shock. Then he moved. He stripped off his cloak in one smooth motion and stepped forward, closing the distance between them before she could flinch away. She braced herself, for violence, for mockery, for the inevitable cruelty that followed moments like this. But instead, he draped the cloak over her head and shoulders with a gentleness that stunned her into silence. The weight of it was immediate and overwhelming. Warm, heavy. It smelled of wool and leather and something faintly spiced, like cloves. It covered her completely, shielding her shorn scalp from the rain, wrapping her in a warmth she had forgotten existed. "Can you stand?" His voice was low and quiet, but it cut through the rain with absolute clarity. Not harsh, not soft, simply direct. A question that required an answer. Elena tried to speak and found her throat too tight. She shook her head once, a barely perceptible motion beneath the folds of the cloak. He crouched down in front of her, his boots sinking into the mud, and for the first time she saw his face clearly. He was not young, perhaps 30, perhaps older, with dark hair plastered to his forehead by the rain and eyes that were difficult to read in the dim light. His features were stern, almost severe, the kind of face that did not smile easily. But there was no cruelty in it, no coldness, only a sharp, watchful intelligence and something else she could not quite identify. "Are you injured?" he asked. She swallowed hard and forced the words out. I can walk. I only need." "That was not what I asked." His tone did not change, but the interruption was absolute. He was not interested in what she thought she could do. He was interested in the truth. Elena hesitated, then nodded. "My head," she whispered. "There are cuts from the—" She stopped. She could not say it, could not give voice to what had been done to her. He understood anyway. His gaze flicked to the edge of the cloak where a thin line of blood had seeped through, staining the fabric near her temple. His mouth tightened, not in anger, but in something closer to restraint, as though he were holding back words that wanted to be spoken. "Can you ride?" he asked instead. She looked past him to the horse waiting patiently in the rain. A massive black stallion, sleek and powerful, the kind of animal that cost more than her stepfather earned in a year. "I have never." "That is not what I asked." Again, the quiet interruption. Again, the refusal to let her hide behind excuses or explanations. Eliner met his eyes, dark and unreadable, and nodded once. Good. He rose to his feet in one fluid motion and extended his hand to her. She stared at it for a long moment. It was bare, ungloved, the fingers long and elegant, but marked with faint scars across the knuckles. A gentleman's hand that had known work. She placed her trembling hand in his. His grip was firm and steady as he pulled her upright, supporting her weight without effort when her legs threatened to buckle beneath her. The cloak slipped slightly, and he caught it with his free hand, adjusting it over her shoulders, his movements brisk and impersonal. Not intimate, not invasive, simply practical. "What is your name?" he asked as he guided her toward the horse. "Eliner." Her voice was barely audible over the rain. "Eliner," he repeated, as though committing it to memory. He did not offer his own name in return. Instead, he stopped beside the stallion and placed his hands on her waist, lifting her into the saddle before she could protest. The world tilted dangerously. She gripped the pommel with both hands, her knuckles white, her breath coming in short gasps. The horse shifted beneath her, and she bit back a cry of fear. "Be still," the man said quietly. He swung up behind her in one smooth motion, settling into the saddle and reaching around her to take the reins. His arms bracketed her on either side, solid and unyielding, and she felt the warmth of his body against her back, even through the layers of wet fabric. "Where?" she began, but her voice broke. "Somewhere dry," he said simply. "Somewhere safe." Safe, the word was foreign. She did not know what it meant anymore. The horse began to move, a steady walk at first, and then a gentle trot that sent jolts of pain through Eliner's battered body. She swayed in the saddle, and the man's arm came around her waist, holding her upright with effortless strength. "Lean back," he said, not a request, a command. She obeyed because she had no choice, because her body was failing and her mind was scattering like leaves in the wind. She let her weight rest against him, felt the steady rise and fall of his breathing, heard the rain drumming against his coat and the rhythmic strike of hooves against the road. "What happened to you?" he asked after a long silence. Eliner closed her eyes. The truth sat heavy on her tongue, bitter and humiliating, but he had stopped. He had covered her. He had not turned away. "My stepfather," she whispered. The words caught in her throat like thorns. "He wanted to make sure no man would want me." The arm around her waist tightened fractionally, not enough to hurt, just enough to let her know he had heard. "And the cuts." His voice was very quiet now, very controlled. "The razor," she said. "He was not careful." For a long moment, he said nothing. The only sounds were the rain, the horse, the wind moving through the trees that lined the road. Then, so softly she almost did not hear it. "I see." 2 words, nothing more. But there was something in his tone, something cold and final, that made her think of doors closing, of decisions being made. She wanted to ask where he was taking her, wanted to ask who he was, wanted to ask why he had stopped at all. But exhaustion was pulling at her now, dragging her down into darkness despite her efforts to stay conscious. "Stay awake," he said, and there was an edge of urgency in his voice now. "Eliner, stay awake." But she could not. The warmth of the cloak, the steady rhythm of the horse, the solid presence at her back, it was too much, too kind, too unexpected. Her body, which had endured so much, finally surrendered. The last thing she heard before the darkness took her was his voice, low and commanding, speaking to someone she could not see. "Faster, she is fading." Then nothing. Warmth woke her. Not the weak, fleeting warmth of a dying fire or a thin blanket, but true warmth, deep and enveloping, soaking into her bones like summer sunlight. Eliner's eyes opened slowly, reluctantly, as though her body knew that consciousness would bring questions she was not ready to answer. The ceiling above her was cream-colored plaster, crossed with dark wooden beams. Unfamiliar. The bed beneath her was soft beyond imagining, the sheets crisp and clean against her skin, smelling faintly of lavender. She turned her head slowly, because even that small movement sent a dull ache spreading across her scalp, and saw a room she did not recognize. Large, elegantly furnished. A fire burned steadily in the hearth, casting warm golden light across polished floorboards and a thick burgundy carpet. Heavy curtains framed tall windows, drawn against what appeared to be daylight. A chair sat beside the bed, upholstered in dark green velvet, and on a small table nearby stood a porcelain pitcher and basin. She was not in her stepfather's house. The realization brought with it a flood of memory. The rain, the road, the man on horseback, his cloak covering her head, his arms holding her upright as the world dissolved into darkness. Aliner's hand moved instinctively to her head. Soft fabric met her fingers, linen wrapped carefully around her skull. A bandage. Beneath it, she felt the unfamiliar smoothness of her shorn scalp, but the sharp sting of the razor cuts had dulled to a manageable throb. Someone had tended her wounds. The door opened quietly, and a woman entered carrying a tray. She was perhaps 50, dressed in the neat black dress and white apron of a housekeeper, her gray hair pinned severely beneath a starched cap. Her face was lined but kind, her movements brisk and efficient as she set the tray on the table and turned to look at Aliner. "Awake, then," she said, and her voice held the faint trace of a northern accent. "Good, I was beginning to worry." Aliner struggled to sit up, and the housekeeper moved immediately to help, placing a firm hand on her shoulder and adjusting the pillows behind her back. "Easy now," the woman said. "You've been asleep near a full day. Your body needs rest." "A full day," Aliner's voice came out hoarse and cracked. "Since His Grace brought you in, yes." The housekeeper poured water from the pitcher into a glass and handed it to Aliner. "Drink slowly." Aliner obeyed, the cool water soothing her parched throat. "His Grace," she repeated carefully. "The Duke of Ashford," the housekeeper said, as though this should be obvious. "Master of this house. The man who found you on the Carrington Road and carried you here half dead from cold and shock." A duke, the man who had stopped for her, who had covered her head and lifted her onto his horse and held her as she faded, was a duke. Aliner set the glass down with trembling hands. "I should not be here." "And where exactly should you be?" The housekeeper's tone was matter-of-fact, not unkind. "Back on the road, back in the rain, back wherever it was that someone took a razor to your head like you were livestock." The bluntness of it struck Aliner silent. The housekeeper sighed and sat down in the green velvet chair, her expression softening slightly. "My name is Mrs. Hartley. I've kept house for His Grace these past 12 years. I've seen him bring home injured horses, stray dogs, and once a fox kit with a broken leg. But never a young woman. That alone tells me you are not here by accident." "I do not understand," Aliner whispered. "You will," Mrs. Hartley said simply. "For now, you need to eat, build your strength. Then we will see about getting you properly dressed and presentable." She lifted a bowl from the tray, broth, rich and steaming, and held it out. Aliner took it with both hands, feeling the warmth seep into her palms, and drank. It was the best thing she had ever tasted. Mrs. Hartley watched her in silence for a moment, then said quietly, "Who did this to you, child?" Aliner lowered the bowl. The question sat heavy in the air between them. "My stepfather," she said finally. "He believed I was becoming. Too hopeful, too willing to imagine a future beyond his house. He wanted to ensure no man would look at me with anything but pity or disgust." Mrs. Hartley's mouth tightened into a thin line. "And did he succeed?" Aliner's hand rose unconsciously to the bandage. "I do not know yet." "Then let me tell you," Mrs. Hartley said, her voice firm. "His Grace looked at you with neither pity nor disgust. He looked at you as though you were a person in need of help, and he helped you. That is the measure of the man, and if you are wondering whether you belong here, stop. You are here because he decided you should be. That is enough." Before Aliner could respond, there was a soft knock at the door. "Enter," Mrs. Hartley called. The door opened, and the Duke of Ashford stepped into the room. He looked different in daylight, taller somehow, though that was impossible. His dark hair was neatly combed, his clothes impeccable, a dove-gray waistcoat, dark trousers, polished boots. But his face was the same, stern, watchful, difficult to read. He stood just inside the doorway, his hands clasped loosely behind his back, and looked at Aliner with an expression she could not decipher. "You are awake," he said, a statement, not a question. "Yes, Your Grace." Elinor's voice was steadier now, though her heart was beating too fast. I must thank you for stopping, for bringing me here, for— You need not thank me for doing what any decent person would do, he interrupted quietly. But you are not any person, Elinor said before she could stop herself. You are a duke, and I am a woman who was left to die on the road, he finished. That is all I needed to know. Mrs. Hartley stood and moved toward the door. I will leave you to speak, she said, glancing between them. Ring if you need anything. She slipped out, closing the door softly behind her, and Elinor was alone with the Duke. He moved closer, not to the bed, but to the window, and drew back one of the curtains, letting pale morning light spill into the room. He stood there for a moment, looking out at something Elinor could not see, his profile sharp against the brightness. How do you feel? He asked without turning. Better, Elinor said honestly, thanks to you and Mrs. Hartley. The physician said the cuts will heal cleanly. You were fortunate, they could have festered. I do not feel Fortunate, your grace. That made him turn. He looked at her directly now, and she saw something flicker in his eyes, something that might have been approval. No, he said quietly, I imagine you do not. Silence stretched between them. Elinor felt the weight of it, the strange intimacy of being in a bedroom with a man she did not know, rescued by him, tended by his staff, lying in his sheets. It should have been improper. It should have been scandalous. But somehow it was neither. What will you do now? He asked. The question surprised her. I do not know, she admitted. I have nowhere to go, no family, no prospects. My stepfather made certain of that. You could go into service, the Duke said, still watching her. A position in a household. Mrs. Hartley could write you a reference. A reference for what? Elinor's voice sharpened despite herself. For a woman with no hair and a face that will frighten children. For someone whose own stepfather found her so unbearable that he disfigured her to keep her in her place. The Duke's expression did not change, but something in his posture shifted. You speak well, he observed. Better than most servants. Elinor lifted her chin. My mother taught me. She was a governess before she married my father. She believed education was not the privilege of rank, but the right of reason. Your mother sounds like a woman of intelligence. She was, Elinor said quietly. She died when I was 12. My father remarried within the year, and I have been paying for my mother's pride ever since. The Duke was silent for a long moment. Then he said, Can you read? Yes. Right. Yes. Latin. Elinor hesitated, then nodded. Some. My mother taught me the basics before she fell ill. Mathematics. Enough to keep household accounts. The Duke turned away from the window and walked slowly toward the bed. He stopped at the foot of it, resting one hand on the carved wooden post, and studied her with an intensity that made her want to look away. Why did he do it? The Duke asked. Truly, was it only to prevent you from marrying? Elinor met his gaze. He owed money, she said, to a man in the village, a merchant. The merchant said he would forgive the debt if my stepfather gave me to him as a wife. But I refused. I told my stepfather I would rather die than marry a man twice my age who smelled of ale and spoke to me as though I were cattle. And so he made you unmarriageable, the Duke said softly. Yes. To punish you for refusing. To teach me my place, Elinor corrected. He said I had grown too proud, that I had forgotten I was nothing but a burden he had taken on out of charity. He said no man would ever want me now, and I would spend the rest of my life grateful for whatever scraps he chose to give me. The Duke's hand tightened on the bedpost, and then he cast you out. Yes. With nothing. With the dress I wore and the knowledge that I had chosen my dignity over my survival. Elinor's voice did not waver. I do not regret it. The Duke stared at her for a long moment, and something changed in his face. The sternness softened not into pity, but into something Elinor could not name. Respect, perhaps, or recognition. You may stay here, he said finally. As long as you need. Mrs. Hartley will see to your care. When you are strong enough, we will discuss what comes next. I cannot accept charity, your grace, Elinor said quietly. It is not charity, the Duke replied. It is justice, and you will accept it because you have no other choice." Before Alina could argue, there was a sharp knock at the door. The Duke frowned and crossed the room in 3 long strides, opening it to reveal a footman holding a silver tray. "A letter, Your Grace," the footman said, his voice tight with something that might have been urgency. "From Carrington, it arrived by special messenger." The Duke took the letter, broke the seal, and read it in silence. Alina watched his face carefully, saw the way his jaw tightened, the way his eyes narrowed. "What is it?" she asked, though she had no right to. The Duke looked up, and for the first time, she saw something dangerous flash across his features. "Your stepfather," he said quietly, "has accused you of theft. He claims you stole money and jewelry from his household before you fled. He has asked the magistrate to issue a warrant for your arrest." The room seemed to tilt. Alina's hands gripped the sheets. "That is a lie," she whispered. "I took nothing, I have nothing." "I know," the Duke said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "But he does not know you are here, and he will not until I decide what to do about him." He folded the letter carefully and slipped it into his coat pocket. "Rest," he said. "We will speak again this evening." And then he was gone, leaving Alina alone in the warm, quiet room, her heart pounding and her mind racing with the knowledge that her stepfather was not finished with her yet. If you've ever been told you weren't enough, stay with this story. Alina's dignity is about to be tested again, and she will not break. The magistrate arrived 3 days later. Alina heard the carriage from her window, the grinding of wheels on gravel, the sharp commands to the horses, the heavy tread of boots on the front steps. She had been standing at the glass for the better part of an hour, watching the road, waiting for something she knew would come but could not name. Now it had a shape, a sound, a purpose. Mrs. Hartley appeared in the doorway, her face tight with worry. "His Grace requests your presence in the library," she said quietly. "The magistrate is here. He has questions." Alina's hand rose instinctively to her head. The bandages were gone now, replaced by a simple linen cap that covered her shorn scalp. Mrs. Hartley had offered her a wig, a beautiful thing of dark curls that would have hidden everything, but Alina had refused it. She would not hide. "Am I to be arrested?" she asked. Mrs. Hartley's expression softened. "Not if His Grace has anything to say about it, but you must come, now." Alina followed her down the long hallway, past portraits of stern-faced men and women who seemed to watch her with disapproval, past rooms filled with furniture more valuable than anything her stepfather had ever owned. The house was vast and cold and beautiful, and she did not belong in it. But she walked with her head high. The library doors stood open. Inside, the Duke stood near the fireplace, one hand resting on the mantel, his posture rigid. Across from him sat a heavy-set man in a dark coat, his face ruddy and his eyes sharp. The magistrate. He held a sheaf of papers in one hand and a glass of brandy in the other. Both men turned as Alina entered. The magistrate's eyes swept over her, taking in the cap, the simple gray dress Mrs. Hartley had given her, the pale exhaustion still visible in her face, and his mouth curved into something that was not quite a smile. "Miss Alina Ashworth," he said, rising slowly from his chair. "Or should I say the accused?" "That will do, Pemberton," the Duke said quietly. His voice was calm, but there was an edge to it that made the magistrate pause. "Your Grace," Pemberton said, inclining his head with exaggerated courtesy, "I am here on official business. A formal complaint has been lodged. I am obligated to investigate." "Then investigate," the Duke said, "but you will address Miss Ashworth with respect." Pemberton's smile widened. "Of course, Your Grace, though I must say, harboring a fugitive is a serious matter, even for a man of your station." Alina felt the words like a slap. Fugitive. She had done nothing, taken nothing, and yet here she stood, accused and cornered and utterly powerless. "What are the charges?" she asked, her voice steadier than she felt. Pemberton glanced at the papers in his hand. Theft of currency in the amount of £20, theft of jewelry, specifically a gold locket and a silver brooch, and, he paused, his eyes glittering with something unpleasant, moral corruption and abandonment of duty to your lawful guardian. "My stepfather is not my guardian," Eleanor said coldly. "I am 22. I am of age." "And yet you lived under his roof, ate his food, benefited from his charity." Pemberton set down his glass and folded his hands over his stomach. "Mr. Richard Ashworth claims that you repaid his kindness by stealing from him and fleeing in the night. He has witnesses who will testify to your dishonest character." "What witnesses?" Eleanor demanded. "His housekeeper, his steward, the vicar of St. Michael's Parish." Pemberton's tone was smug. "Respectable people, Miss Ashworth, people whose word carries weight." Eleanor's hands clenched at her sides. The housekeeper had always despised her. The steward did whatever her stepfather commanded. And the vicar had turned a blind eye to everything, content to accept her stepfather's donations and ignore the bruises Eleanor's mother had worn before she died. "They are lying," she said, "all of them." "That is a serious accusation," Pemberton said mildly. "So is theft," Eleanor shot back. "And I did not steal anything. I left with nothing but the dress on my back and the boots on my feet. Ask his grace. He found me on the road with less than that." Pemberton turned to the Duke. "Is this true, your grace?" "It is," the Duke said. His voice was clipped. "She had no money, no jewelry, nothing of value." "And yet," Pemberton said slowly, "Mr. Ashworth insists the items were taken. He has provided descriptions, dates, details." He shuffled through his papers. "The locket, for instance, was gold with an engraved rose on the front. Does that sound familiar, Miss Ashworth?" Eleanor's breath caught. The locket had been her mother's, the only thing of value her mother had owned, passed down from Eleanor's grandmother. Her stepfather had taken it the day after the funeral, claiming it as payment for the cost of the burial. Eleanor had not seen it since. "That locket belonged to my mother," she said, her voice shaking now. "He stole it from her, not the other way around." "Do you have proof of that?" Pemberton asked. "Do I?" Eleanor stared at him. "My mother is dead. He took it. I have no proof because he is the only witness and he is a liar." "Strong words," Pemberton said, "but without evidence they are only words." The Duke stepped forward. "What is the purpose of this visit, Pemberton? You have questioned her. You have heard her account. What more do you want?" Pemberton's smile returned. "I want her to return to Carrington, to answer these charges properly, before a magistrate's court." "No," the Duke said flatly. "With respect, your grace, this is not your decision to make." Pemberton's tone hardened. "She is accused of a crime. She must stand trial. If she refuses, I am authorized to take her into custody." Eleanor felt the floor shift beneath her. Custody, a cell, a trial where her stepfather's lies would be weighed against her truth, and she had no proof, no witnesses, no power. She would lose. "There is another option," Pemberton said, his voice oily now. "Mr. Ashworth is a reasonable man. He does not wish to see his stepdaughter imprisoned. He has indicated that if she returns to his household, acknowledges her wrongdoing, and agrees to certain conditions, he would be willing to drop the charges." "What conditions?" the Duke asked sharply. Pemberton's smile was answer enough. Eleanor understood before he spoke. Her stepfather wanted her back, wanted her broken and obedient, wanted her to beg forgiveness for crimes she had not committed and spend the rest of her life as his unpaid servant, grateful for his mercy. "No," she said. Pemberton blinked. "I beg your pardon." "No," Eleanor repeated, louder now. "I will not return to that house. I will not apologize for defending myself, and I will not lie to save myself from a trial built on his lies." "Miss Ashworth," Pemberton said, his tone patronizing, "you are not thinking clearly. If you refuse this offer, you will go to trial. You will almost certainly be convicted. Do you understand what that means? Prison, transportation, perhaps ruin." "I understand perfectly," Eleanor said. Her voice was ice. "I understand that my stepfather wants me to choose between my freedom and my dignity, and I choose my dignity." The room fell silent. The Duke was staring at her with an expression she could not read. Pemberton looked genuinely shocked. "You are making a grave mistake," Pemberton said finally. "Perhaps," Eleanor said, "but it is my mistake to make." Pemberton stood, gathering his papers with sharp, angry movements. "Very well. I will inform Mr. Ashworth of your decision. The trial will be set for a fortnight from today. You are ordered to appear before the magistrate's court in Carrington on the 15th of November. Failure to appear will result in a warrant for your arrest." He turned to the Duke. "Your Grace, I strongly advise you to reconsider your involvement in this matter, harboring a criminal." "She is not a criminal," the Duke said, his voice deadly quiet. "She is a woman who has been wronged, and she is under my protection." Pemberton's face darkened. "Protection will not save her in court." "We shall see," the Duke said. Pemberton gave a stiff bow and strode toward the door. He paused in the doorway, looking back at Alina with something that might have been pity. "You could have had peace," he said. "You chose pride instead. I hope it keeps you warm in a prison cell." Then he was gone. Alina stood frozen in the center of the room, her hands trembling, her heart pounding so hard she thought it might break through her ribs. She had done it. She had refused. She had chosen the impossible thing, the dangerous thing, the thing that might destroy her. And she did not regret it. The Duke moved to the door and closed it softly. Then he turned to face her. "That was either the bravest thing I have ever seen," he said quietly, "or the most foolish." "Perhaps both," Alina whispered. He crossed the room and stopped in front of her. Close enough that she could see the faint lines at the corners of his eyes, the tension in his jaw, the way his hands were clenched at his sides, as though he were restraining himself from some action he could not name. "You understand what you have done?" he asked. "Yes." "You will go to trial. You will be judged by men who do not know you and will not care to. Your stepfather will bring witnesses. He will lie under oath, and you will have nothing but your word to stand against him." "I know," Alina said. "Then why?" The Duke's voice was almost anguished now. "Why not take the offer? Why not go back, apologize, endure a few more years in his house until you can find another way out?" Alina looked up at him. "Because I would rather die with my dignity intact then. Live as his prisoner. Because if I go back now, I will never leave. And because—" her voice broke, but she forced the words out. "Because my mother taught me that some things are worth more than survival, and I will not dishonor her memory by becoming the frightened, silent girl he wanted me to be." The Duke stared at her for a long moment. Then, slowly, something changed in his face. The sternness softened. The restraint cracked. And for the first time since she had met him, she saw something raw and unguarded in his eyes. "You are remarkable," he said quietly. Alina's breath caught. "I will help you," he continued. "I will find a way to prove his lies. I will find witnesses. I will." "You cannot," Alina interrupted gently. "You are a duke, but even you cannot rewrite the law. Even you cannot force people to tell the truth when they have been paid to lie." "Then what do you suggest?" he asked, and there was frustration in his voice now. "That I simply stand by and watch you be convicted of crimes you did not commit." Alina smiled faintly. It was a sad, tired smile, but it was real. "I suggest," she said, "that you let me stand on my own. Let me face this trial with my head high and my conscience clear. And if I fall, at least I will fall knowing I did not betray myself to save myself." The Duke shook his head slowly. "You are going to break my heart, Alina Ashworth." "Better mine than yours, Your Grace," she said softly. And she turned and walked out of the library, leaving him standing alone by the fire. The courtroom was smaller than Alina had imagined. Cold stone walls, high windows that let in gray November light, wooden benches crowded with villagers who had come to watch her humiliation as though it were a public entertainment. At the front of the room, behind a heavy oak table, sat 3 magistrates in dark robes, their faces impassive and unknowable. And across the aisle, looking every inch the wounded patriarch, sat her stepfather. Richard Ashworth had dressed for the occasion. Dark coat, somber waistcoat, his face arranged in an expression of pained dignity as though he were the victim here and not the architect of this elaborate lie. He did not look at Alina. He did not need to. His presence was statement enough. Alina sat alone on the defendant's bench, her hands folded in her lap, her spine straight. The Duke had wanted to come, had insisted, but his solicitor had advised against it. A duke's presence would make the magistrates uncomfortable, defensive, less likely to rule impartially. So he had remained at Ashford Hall, and Alina had come here alone. Almost alone. Mrs. Hartley sat in the gallery behind her, a silent pillar of support. But one housekeeper could not undo what was about to happen. The lead magistrate, a thin man with silver spectacles and a mouth like a knife slash, cleared his throat. We will hear the case of Richard Ashworth versus Alina Ashworth. Charges: theft of currency and property, abandonment of duty, moral corruption. He looked at Alina over the rim of his spectacles. How does the accused plead? Alina stood. Not guilty, sir. A murmur rippled through the gallery. Her stepfather's mouth twitched, almost a smile. Very well, the magistrate said. Mr. Ashworth, present your case. Richard Ashworth rose slowly, leaning slightly on a cane he had not needed 3 weeks ago. Alina recognized the performance. He was playing the role of aging man, betrayed by ungrateful youth. Gentlemen, he began, his voice heavy with sorrow, I come before you not in anger, but in grief. Miss Alina Ashworth, my late wife's daughter, whom I raised as my own, has repaid my years of care with treachery and theft. Alina's jaw tightened. Every word was poison wrapped in velvet. I provided for her, he continued, clothed her, fed her, gave her a home when she had none, and in return she stole 20 pounds from my strongbox and my late wife's jewelry. Then she fled in the night, leaving me to discover her betrayal at dawn. Do you have proof of this theft? The magistrate asked. I do, sir. Richard gestured to a man seated behind him. My steward, Mr. Garrett, witnessed her near the strongbox the day before she disappeared, and my housekeeper, Mrs. Poole, will testify to finding the locket and brooch missing from my late wife's jewelry case. Garrett stood, a thin, nervous man with darting eyes. He avoided looking at Alina as he spoke. I saw her, sirs, near the study. She was agitated. I thought nothing of it at the time, but the next morning Mr. Ashworth discovered the theft. And the jewelry, the magistrate prompted. Mrs. Poole rose next. She was older, heavy-set, her face set in disapproving lines. Alina had always known the woman disliked her, but seeing her stand here, preparing to lie under oath, still felt like a blade between the ribs. The locket was in the case on Sunday evening, sirs. Monday morning it was gone, and the girl Dee fled. I see, the magistrate said. He made a note on the paper before him. And what of the claim of moral corruption? Richard's face darkened with perfectly calibrated shame. I hesitate to speak of it, sirs, but the truth must be told. My stepdaughter formed an inappropriate attachment to a young man in the village. When I forbade the association for her own protection, you understand, she became defiant, hostile. She accused me of cruelty, of seeking to control her. He paused, letting the words settle. I sought only to guide her toward respectability, toward a future befitting her station, but she rejected my counsel. And when I discovered she had been meeting this young man in secret, I took measures to protect her reputation. Alina felt the rage building in her chest like a storm. Measures? He called what he had done to her head measures. What measures, Mr. Ashworth? The magistrate asked. Richard hesitated, as though the memory pained him. I cut her hair, sirs, to discourage further impropriety. I believed it would help her see reason. Instead, she fled. The courtroom erupted in whispers. Alina felt every eye on her, felt the weight of their judgment, their shock, their pity. She wanted to scream, to tear the cap from her head and show them what he had truly done. But she remained still. Silent. Dignified. Miss Ashworth, the magistrate said, and his voice was not unkind. You may present your defense. Alina stood. Her legs felt unsteady, but her voice did not waver. I took nothing from that house, sirs. No money, no jewelry. I left with the dress I wore and nothing else. The locket my stepfather claims I stole was my mother's. He took it from her belongings after her death. I have not seen it since. Do you have proof of this? The magistrate asked. No, sir. My mother is dead, and my stepfather controls everything that was hers. And the money. I never went near the strongbox. Mr. Garrett is mistaken, or he is lying. Another murmur from the gallery. The magistrate's expression hardened. That is a serious accusation, Miss Ashworth. So is theft, sir, and I am innocent. Can you provide witnesses to support your claim? Elinor's throat tightened. No, sir, I have no witnesses, only my word. The magistrate exchanged glances with his colleagues. Elinor saw the truth in their faces. They had already decided. Her word, the word of a young woman with a shorn head and no family and no fortune, would not outweigh the testimony of a respectable man and his loyal servants. She had lost. Is there anyone who can speak to Miss Ashworth's character? The second magistrate asked. Anyone who can testify on her behalf? Silence. Elinor looked at Mrs. Hartley, but the housekeeper's face was pale with helplessness. She could testify to Elinor's conduct at Ashford Hall, but she knew nothing of what had happened before. She could not undo the lies. No one could. Elinor was about to sit down when a voice rang out from the back of the courtroom. I can. Every head turned. A young man stood in the doorway. He was perhaps 25, neatly dressed in the clothes of a tradesman, his face honest and open. Elinor stared at him, her heart pounding. Thomas. The clerk from the village, the young man whose smile had started all of this. He walked slowly down the aisle, his eyes fixed on Elinor, and stopped before the magistrate's table. My name is Thomas Brennan, sirs. I am a clerk in my father's shop in Carrington, and I have something to say about this case. Richard Ashworth's face went white. Speak, then, the lead magistrate said. Thomas turned to face the courtroom. I know Miss Ashworth. I spoke with her on several occasions at the market. She was kind, intelligent, modest in every way. There was nothing improper in our conversations. He paused. But Mr. Ashworth saw us speaking, and the next time I went to the market, she was not there. Relevance, Mr. Brennan, the magistrate asked. I went to Mr. Ashworth's house, sirs, to ask after her. He told me she had fallen ill, but I saw her through a window and she was not ill. She was terrified, and 2 days later I saw her again. His voice hardened. Walking on the Carrington Road, in the rain, with her head shaved and blood on her neck. The courtroom exploded. The magistrates called for order, their voices sharp, but the damage was done. Every eye was on Richard Ashworth now, and his face was no longer composed. It was red, furious, trapped. That is a lie, he shouted. The boy is besotted with her. He would say anything. I am not lying, Thomas said calmly. And I am not alone. Mrs. Whitmore, the baker's wife, also saw Miss Ashworth on the road. She will testify to the same. As will Mr. Davies, the blacksmith, who saw Mr. Ashworth strike Miss Ashworth in the village square 3 months ago. Richard lunged forward. You insolent. Silence, the lead magistrate barked. He looked at Thomas with new int. Arrest. These witnesses, can you produce them? They are outside, sir, waiting to be called. The magistrate nodded slowly. Then we will hear them. One by one, the witnesses came forward. Mrs. Whitmore, who confirmed she had seen Elinor on the road, injured and alone. Mr. Davies, who testified to the violence he had witnessed. A shopkeeper who spoke of Richard Ashworth's debts, his drinking, his temper. And with each testimony, the lie crumbled a little more. Elinor sat frozen, hardly daring to breathe. She had not known these people were watching, had not known they cared, but they had seen, and they had chosen truth. When the last witness finished, the lead magistrate looked at Richard Ashworth with undisguised contempt. It appears, Mr. Ashworth, that your account of events is unreliable. Richard's mouth worked, but no sound came out. This case, the magistrate continued, is dismissed. Miss Ashworth, you are free to go. Elinor's legs gave out. She sank onto the bench, her vision blurring with tears she could not stop. Mrs. Hartley was beside her in an instant, her arms around Elinor's shoulders, murmuring words Elinor could not hear. Thomas stood across the aisle, watching her with quiet concern. She met his eyes and mouthed 2 words. Thank you. He nodded once, then turned and walked out of the courtroom, leaving Elinor surrounded by the ruins of her stepfather's lies and the fragile, precious truth that had saved her. If you're feeling what Elinor is feeling right now, that moment when truth is all you have left, let me know in the comments. This story isn't over. The magistrate was not finished. Alina had begun to stand, her legs still unsteady, when the lead magistrate raised his hand. "Remain seated, Miss Ashworth," he said. His voice was cold now, all trace of earlier neutrality gone. "We are not done here." She sank back onto the bench, confused. The case had been dismissed. She was free. What more could there be? The magistrate turned his attention to Richard Ashworth, who stood frozen near the witness stand, his face a mottled red, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. "Mr. Ashworth," the magistrate said slowly, "you have brought false charges before this court. You have presented perjured testimony, and you have wasted the time of 3 magistrates and a courtroom full of witnesses." He paused. "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" Richard's mouth opened and closed. For a moment, he looked like a man drowning. The witnesses are mistaken," he stammered. "They are confused. My stepdaughter is a manipulative girl. She has turned them against me with lies and—" "Enough," the magistrate's voice cracked like a whip. "I have heard enough of your lies." He gestured to the bailiff standing near the door. "Bring in the other witness." Alina's breath caught. Other witness? She exchanged a glance with Mrs. Hartley, who looked equally bewildered. The courtroom door opened, and a woman entered. She was perhaps 40, plainly dressed, her face lined with exhaustion and something that looked like fear. Alina did not recognize her, but Richard Ashworth did. The color drained from his face. "No," he whispered. "No, you cannot." "State your name for the record," the magistrate said. The woman's voice was quiet but clear. "Mary Garrett, sir, wife of Mr. James Garrett, steward to Mr. Ashworth." "And you have come forward with information pertinent to this case." "Yes, sir." Mary Garrett's hands twisted in her shawl. "I heard my husband and Mr. Ashworth speaking 2 nights ago, in Mr. Ashworth's study. They did not know I was listening." "What did you hear?" Mary took a breath. "Mr. Ashworth told my husband to testify that he had seen Miss Alina near the strongbox. He said it did not matter if it was true. He said the magistrates would believe James before they believed a girl with no family and no prospects." The courtroom erupted again. Voices rose in shock and outrage. The magistrate called for order, his gavel striking the table 3 times before silence returned. "Continue," the magistrate said. "My husband refused at first," Mary said, and her voice broke slightly. "He said he could not lie under oath, but Mr. Ashworth threatened him, said he would dismiss him without reference, that we would lose our home, our wages, everything." She looked at Richard with something close to hatred. "So my husband agreed, and I have not been able to sleep since." "This is preposterous," Richard shouted. "The woman is lying, she is." "Bring in Mr. Garrett," the magistrate ordered. James Garrett was brought forward, his face ashen, his hands shaking. He would not look at his wife, would not look at anyone. "Mr. Garrett," the magistrate said quietly, "is your wife's testimony accurate?" Silence. "Mr. Garrett, you are under oath. Answer the question." James Garrett's shoulders sagged. "Yes, sir," he whispered. "It is accurate." The room seemed to hold its breath. "You lied," the magistrate said, "under oath in a court of law." "Yes, sir." "Why?" "Because he threatened to ruin me." James finally looked up, his eyes landing on Richard. "Because I have a wife and 3 children and no savings, because I was afraid." "And the theft," the magistrate pressed. "Did you see Miss Ashworth near the strongbox?" "No, sir. I never saw her anywhere near it." "And the money, was it actually stolen?" James hesitated. Then he said very quietly, "I do not believe so, sir. Mr. Ashworth keeps poor records, he drinks, he gambles. He owes debts all over Carrington. It is possible he simply spent the money and forgot." Richard lunged at him. "You traitorous." The bailiff caught him by the arm, yanking him back with more force than was strictly necessary. Richard stumbled, his carefully constructed dignity finally cracking into something raw and desperate. "They are lying," he screamed. "All of them, they have conspired against me. My own steward turning on me like a viper. The girl has poisoned them somehow." "Be silent," the magistrate said, and his voice was ice. Richard fell silent, breathing hard, his face twisted with rage and something else. Fear. The magistrate turned to Mrs. Poole, who sat pale and trembling on the witness bench. "Mrs. Poole, you testified that the locket and brooch were missing from the jewelry case. Do you stand by that testimony?" Mrs. Poole's mouth worked soundlessly. "Mrs. Poole," the magistrate repeated, his tone sharpening, "answer the question." "Aye." She looked at Richard, then at the magistrate, then down at her hands. "I was told to say it, sir." "By whom?" "By Mr. Ashworth, sir. He said the jewelry had been misplaced and that I should testify it was stolen. He said it would help bring the girl to her senses." "And was the jewelry actually missing?" Mrs. Poole shook her head miserably. "No, sir. The locket is in Mr. Ashworth's desk drawer. I saw it there yesterday." The courtroom dissolved into chaos. Voices shouted. People stood from their benches. The magistrates conferred in urgent whispers. And through it all, Richard Ashworth stood frozen, his world collapsing around him in real time. Elinor sat in stunned silence, watching the man who had terrorized her for 10 years be dismantled piece by piece by the very people he had controlled. It should have felt triumphant. It should have felt like justice. But all she felt was exhaustion. The lead magistrate struck his gavel repeatedly until the room quieted. Then he stood, his face grave, and addressed the assembly. "It is the finding of this court that Miss Elinor Ashworth is innocent of all charges. The accusations brought against her were malicious, fabricated, and presented with the intent to harm her reputation and freedom." He turned to Richard. "Mr. Richard Ashworth, you are hereby charged with perjury, conspiracy to commit perjury, and the filing of false charges. You will be held in custody pending trial." Richard's legs buckled. No, you cannot." "Bailiff," the magistrate said calmly, "take him." The bailiff moved forward, but Richard twisted away, his voice rising to a shriek. "She is nothing, a burden, a worthless girl who should be grateful I gave her a roof over her head. I should have turned her out the day her mother died. I should have." The bailiff seized him roughly, and Richard's words dissolved into incoherent shouting as he was dragged toward the door. He fought every step, his dignity in complete ruins, his carefully maintained facade shattered beyond repair. The courtroom watched in silence as he disappeared through the doorway, his voice echoing down the corridor until it finally faded. Then slowly, the room began to shift. People turned to look at Elinor, not with pity now, not with judgment, but with something else: respect, acknowledgement, the recognition that she had endured something monstrous and survived it with her integrity intact. An older woman in the gallery nodded to her. A man removed his hat. Mrs. Whitmore, the baker's wife, smiled gently from her seat near the back. Elinor felt tears prickling at the corners of her eyes, but she did not let them fall. The magistrate addressed her directly. "Miss Ashworth, on behalf of this court, I extend my deepest apologies for the ordeal you have been forced to endure. You have conducted yourself with remarkable dignity in the face of grievous injustice." "Thank you, sir," Elinor said quietly. "The locket and brooch will be retrieved from Mr. Ashworth's possession and returned to you, as they are rightfully yours by inheritance." He paused. "Is there anything else you require from this court?" Elinor thought for a moment. Then she said, "Only that the records show the truth, sir, so that no one else suffers as I did because they were too afraid to speak." The magistrate inclined his head. "It will be noted. You are free to go, Miss Ashworth, with the court's blessing and its profound respect." Elinor stood slowly, her legs steadier now, and turned to leave. Mrs. Hartley was at her side immediately, her arm around Elinor's shoulders, guiding her toward the door. As they walked through the courtroom, people stepped aside to let them pass. Some murmured words of encouragement. Others simply watched in silence, but no one looked at her with scorn or suspicion anymore. The lie had been exposed. The truth had won. Outside, the November air was cold and sharp, but the rain had stopped. Pale sunlight broke through the clouds, casting weak but welcome light across the cobblestone street. Elinor stopped on the courthouse steps and breathed deeply, filling her lungs with air that felt cleaner somehow. "Freer." Thomas Brennan stood near the gate, waiting. When he saw her, he approached slowly, his hat in his hands. "Miss Ashworth," he said quietly, I hope I did not overstep by coming forward. I know we are not. That is, I did not wish to presume." "You saved me," Alina interrupted, her voice thick with emotion. "You and the others, you spoke when you did not have to, you risked his anger, you chose truth when it would have been safer to stay silent." Thomas looked down at his hat, turning it in his hands. "It was the right thing to do." "It was brave," Alina said, "and I will never forget it." He met her eyes then, and something passed between them. Not romance, not yet, but the beginning of something real, something built on honesty rather than desperation. "If you ever need anything," Thomas said, "you know where to find me." Alina smiled faintly. "I do, thank you, Mr. Brennan." He nodded, placed his hat back on his head, and walked away down the street. Mrs. Hartley squeezed Alina's shoulder. "Come, child, His Grace is waiting, and I suspect he will want to hear every word of what happened here today." Alina nodded. She let Mrs. Hartley lead her toward the waiting carriage, her mind still reeling from everything that had transpired. The nightmare was over. Richard Ashworth would face justice. The truth had been spoken. And she, Alina, the girl who had been shaved and shamed and cast aside, had stood her ground and won. Not through power, not through wealth, but through the simple, stubborn refusal to betray herself. As the carriage pulled away from the courthouse, Alina looked back one last time at the building where her stepfather's lies had finally crumbled into dust. And she felt, for the first time in 10 years, the weight begin to lift. Alina found the Duke in the library. He stood at the window, his back to the door, his hands clasped behind him in that particular way he had when he was thinking deeply about something he could not solve. The evening light slanted through the glass, casting long shadows across the Persian rug and the rows of leather-bound books that lined the walls. He had not attended the trial, but he knew. Mrs. Hartley had sent word ahead by messenger. Alina suspected the housekeeper had provided every detail, sparing nothing. The Duke would have demanded no less. "Your Grace," Alina said quietly. He turned immediately, and the expression on his face was something she had never seen before. Relief, profound and unguarded. "Alina," he crossed the room in 4 long strides, stopping just short of touching her. His eyes scanned her face as though checking for injuries. "Are you well?" "I am well," she said. "It is over. He will stand trial for perjury. The charges against me are dismissed." "I know," his voice was rough. "Mrs. Hartley told me, but I needed to hear it from you. I needed to see you." Alina looked down at her hands. They were no longer trembling. "I came to thank you for everything you have done, for giving me shelter, for believing me when no one else did, for—" "Do not," he said sharply. She looked up, startled. "Do not thank me," he continued, his tone gentler now but still firm. "Not for doing what anyone with a shred of decency would have done." "You are not anyone," Alina said. "You are a duke, and I am." "What?" he interrupted. "What are you, Alina?" She hesitated. "No one, a girl with no family, no dowry, no prospects. A girl whose own stepfather tried to destroy her because she dared to hope for something better." The Duke's jaw tightened. "You are not no one." "Then what am I?" He stared at her for a long moment, and she saw something shift in his eyes, something unspoken struggling to break free. But he only said, "You are someone who deserves better than what this world has given you." Alina felt her throat tighten. She turned away, moving toward the fireplace where the flames crackled softly. "I have been thinking," she said quietly. "Now that the trial is over, I should make arrangements to leave." Silence. She did not turn around, but she felt the weight of it pressing against her back. "Leave," the Duke said finally. His voice was carefully controlled. "Yes," Alina kept her eyes on the fire. "I cannot remain here indefinitely. It would not be proper, and I have already imposed on your kindness far too long." "You have imposed nothing." "Your Grace." "Where will you go?" he asked. Alina had been asking herself the same question for days. "I do not know yet, perhaps into service. Mrs. Hartley said she could write me a reference, or perhaps I could find work as a governess. My mother taught me enough that I might." "Stop." The single word cut through her rambling like a blade. Alina turned to face him. He had moved closer without her noticing, and now he stood only a few feet away, his expression unreadable. "Why are you doing this?" he asked quietly. "Doing what?" "Planning your departure, preparing to leave, as though you have no choice but to go." "I do not have a choice," Alina said. "I cannot stay here. People will talk, they will say." "I do not care what they say," the Duke said, and there was heat in his voice now, real anger. "Let them talk, let them whisper, let them invent whatever scandal pleases them. I do not care." Alina stared at him. "You should care. You are a duke, your reputation." "My reputation," he said slowly, "has survived far worse than harboring a woman in need. It will survive this." "But I am not just a woman in need," Alina said, her voice rising despite herself. "I am a woman with a shaved head and a ruined name and a stepfather awaiting trial for perjury. I am a scandal waiting to happen, and if I stay here, I will ruin you." "You could not ruin me if you tried," the Duke said flatly. "You do not know that." "Yes," he said, "I do." He took a step closer, then another, until he was near enough that she could see the faint scar above his left eyebrow, the flecks of gold in his dark eyes, the tension in the set of his mouth. "Alina," he said quietly, "why do you want to leave?" The question caught her off guard. "I told you, it is not proper for me to." "That is not what I asked." She looked away. "I do not want to be a burden." "You are not a burden." "I do not want to be your charity case," she said, her voice breaking now. "I do not want to be the poor, damaged girl you rescued out of pity. I do not want to owe you my survival." "Is that what you think this is?" the Duke asked, and there was something raw in his voice now. "Pity." Alina forced herself to meet his gaze. What else could it be? For a long moment, he said nothing. He simply looked at her, and she saw something in his face that made her heart stutter in her chest. "I do not pity you," he said finally. "I have never pitied you." "Then what?" "I admire you," he said. The words came out rough, as though they had been pulled from somewhere deep and guarded. "I admire your courage, your refusal to break, your stubborn, impossible dignity that no one, not your stepfather, not the magistrate, not the whole damn world could take from you." Alina's breath caught. "When I found you on that road," he continued, his voice quieter now, "I thought I was saving you, but I was wrong. You did not need saving. You needed someone to stand beside you while you saved yourself. And he stopped, swallowed. "I have not been able to stop thinking about what it would mean if you left." "Your Grace," Alina whispered. "My name is Julian," he said, "and I would like very much for you to use it." Alina stared at him. "I cannot." "Why not?" "Because it would be improper. Because you are a duke and I am." "What you are," Julian said, stepping closer still, "is the most remarkable woman I have ever met, and I do not want you to leave." The room seemed to shrink, the fire crackled, the clock on the mantel ticked, and Alina felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "You do not know what you are saying," she said weakly. "I know exactly what I am saying." His voice was steady now, certain. "I am saying that I want you to stay, not as a guest, not as a charity case, but as—" He stopped, and for the first time since she had met him, she saw uncertainty flicker across his face. "As someone who belongs here, with me." Alina's hands were shaking again. "Why?" "Because I do not know what to do with the feeling of not wanting you to leave," he said simply. "Because you have disrupted every carefully ordered part of my life, and I find I do not want order anymore. I want—" He stopped, looked at her with something close to helplessness. "I want you." Silence. Alina could not breathe, could not think, could not do anything but stare at this man, this impossible, stern, kind man, who had just said the words she had not dared to hope for. "I have nothing," she whispered finally. "No dowry, no family, no." "I do not care," Julian said. "I have enough for both of us." "People will say you married beneath you." "Let them say it. They will say I trapped you, that I used my circumstances too." "Alina," he reached out slowly, carefully, and took her hand in his. His touch was warm and solid and real. "Do you want to stay?" The question was so simple, so direct, so you. Teeterly without pretense. And Alina realized, with a clarity that took her breath away, that she did. She wanted to stay in this house with its warm fires and kind housekeeper and the man who had covered her head with his cloak and asked her if she could stand. She wanted to wake up every morning knowing she was safe, wanted, valued for who she was and not what she could provide. She wanted to stay. "Yes," she whispered. Julian's hand tightened around hers. "Then stay." "It will not be easy," she said. "People will talk, they will." "I do not care," he said again. "Let them talk, let them judge, let them think whatever they like. As long as you are here, I can endure anything." Eleanor looked down at their joined hands. His were scarred and strong. Hers were small and marked by years of work. They did not match, but somehow they fit. "I am still afraid," she admitted. "So am I," Julian said quietly. She looked up, surprised. "You?" "Terrified," he said, and there was the ghost of a smile on his lips now. "I have not allowed myself to want anything in a very long time, and now I want something I cannot control or command or purchase. I want you to choose to stay, and that is the most frightening thing I have ever asked for." Eleanor felt tears burning at the corners of her eyes. "Then I choose to stay," she said. Julian exhaled slowly, as though he had been holding his breath for days. "You are certain?" "No," Eleanor said honestly, "but I am choosing it anyway." He smiled then, a real smile, small and uncertain and entirely genuine. "That will do." And he raised her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, a gesture so simple and so profound that Eleanor felt something in her chest crack open and let the light in. 6 months later, Eleanor stood in the same library where Julian had asked her to stay. But everything was different now. Spring had arrived at Ashford Hall, transforming the grounds into a canvas of green and gold. Through the window, she could see the gardens in full bloom, roses climbing the stone walls, lavender swaying in the breeze, the ancient oak trees dressed in new leaves. The world had turned, and she had turned with it. She raised her hand to her head, a gesture that had become habit, though the meaning had changed. Her fingers met soft curls instead of bandages. Hair, grown back in gentle waves that Mrs. Hartley had helped her pin that morning. Not long yet, not what it had been, but hers. Healed. The door opened behind her, and she heard Julian's familiar footsteps crossing the room. She did not turn. She had learned to recognize him by sound alone, the measured pace of his walk, the way he moved through space with quiet confidence, the small sigh he gave when he thought himself unobserved. He stopped beside her at the window, close enough that his shoulder brushed hers. "You are thinking," he said. "I am remembering," Eleanor corrected. "The trial. Before that, the road, the rain." She touched her head again, and Julian's hand rose to cover hers. "What he did to me, what he wanted me to believe about myself." Julian's fingers laced through hers, gentle but firm. "And what do you believe now?" Eleanor considered the question. 6 months ago, she would not have known how to answer. 6 months ago, she had been a girl who measured her worth by other people's cruelty, who believed that survival meant making herself small, who thought dignity was something that could be taken with a razor and a handful of lies. She knew better now. "I believe," she said slowly, "that my worth was never his to determine, that it never depended on my hair or my prospects or whether any man found me beautiful. I believe I was always valuable. I just could not see it yet." Julian brought their joined hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles. "Neither could I," he said quietly, "until you showed me." She turned to look at him. "I showed you." "You showed me what courage looks like," he said. "Real courage, not the kind that comes from wealth or title or power. The kind that stands alone in a courtroom and chooses truth when every instinct screams to lie. The kind that walks away from safety because safety without dignity is only another kind of prison." Eleanor felt her throat tighten. "You gave me that safety." "No," Julian said. "You claimed it. I only provided the house." She smiled despite the tears gathering in her eyes. "A rather large house." "True," he smiled back, "but a house is only stone and wood. You made it a home." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the gardens sway in the spring breeze. Beyond the estate walls, life continued its rhythms, merchants traveling the roads, farmers tending their fields, the village of Carrington going about its business as though nothing extraordinary had ever happened there. But something extraordinary had happened. Richard Ashworth had been convicted of perjury and fraud. He had been sentenced to 2 years in prison and the forfeiture of his property. The house where Alina had spent 10 years in silent suffering had been sold to pay his debts. She had received nothing from the sale, she had wanted nothing. But the locket, her mother's locket, had been returned to her as the court had promised. She wore it now, warm against her skin beneath the collar of her dress. Thomas Brennan had visited twice since the trial, always respectful, always kind. He had congratulated her on her marriage to the Duke with genuine warmth and no trace of wounded pride. He had found someone else to smile at in the market, Alina had heard. A baker's daughter with a quick laugh and gentle hands. She hoped they would be happy. Mrs. Hartley still kept house at Ashford Hall, though she complained loudly and often that Alina was far too willing to help with tasks beneath her station. "You are a duchess now," she would scold. "Let the maids do the dusting." But Alina could not quite break the habit of useful work. And Julian, to Mrs. Hartley's eternal exasperation, never asked her to. "I received a letter this morning," Julian said, breaking the silence, "from Mary Garrett." Alina looked up. "James's wife." "Yes, she writes to thank you again, and to tell you that James has found new employment, with a gentleman in York who values honesty over fear." "I am glad," Alina said, and meant it. James Garrett had made a terrible choice, but he had also found the courage to undo it. That counted for something. "She also writes," Julian continued, "that several young women from Carrington have come to her seeking advice. Women in situations not unlike yours, trapped in households where cruelty masqueraded as care. She wants to know if you would be willing to meet with them." Alina's heart clenched. "To do what?" "To listen," Julian said simply. "To tell them what you learned. That silence protects the guilty, not the innocent. That dignity cannot be stolen, only surrendered. That there are people who will stand beside them if they find the courage to speak." Alina looked out at the gardens, at the world that had tried to break her and failed. "Yes," she said, "tell her yes." Julian squeezed her hand. "I thought you would say that." They stood together as the afternoon light deepened to gold. Two people who had found each other in the darkest of circumstances and chosen, against all odds, to build something worth keeping. Alina thought of the girl she had been 6 months ago, cold, bleeding, kneeling in the mud with nothing but her wounded dignity to keep her warm. That girl had survived, had refused to break, had chosen truth when lies would have been easier. And in choosing truth, she had found something she never expected. She had found herself. "What are you thinking now?" Julian asked. Alina smiled. "That my mother was right. Some things are worth more than survival." "And what are those things?" She turned to face him fully. This man who had covered her head when she was exposed, who had believed her when no one else would, who had loved her not despite her wounds, but because of the courage with which she bore them. "Dignity," she said, "truth, love." Julian's hand came up to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing away a tear she had not realized was falling. "Yes," he said softly, "those things, always those things." And he kissed her, there in the library where he had first asked her to stay, as the spring sunlight poured through the windows and the world outside bloomed with new life. Alina had walked through fire and emerged on the other side. She had been shaved, shamed, and cast aside. But she had not been broken. And that made all the difference. If Alina's story moved you, if you've ever had someone try to make you believe you were unworthy, that you were nothing, that you should be grateful for cruelty disguised as care, I want to hear from you. Comment below, what moment in this story hit you the hardest? Was it when she refused to beg, when Thomas stepped forward, when Julian asked her to stay? Your thoughts keep these stories alive, and they remind us all that dignity is not given by others, it's claimed by ourselves. Subscribe so you never miss these stories of courage, truth, and love that refuses to be broken. And remember this, your worth was never theirs to take. It was always yours, and it always will be.